Okay, the last specimen in this series is the skin integument. Sometimes skin and integument are used interchangeably. Specifically, though, the skin is the epidermis and dermis, and then that below you have the hypodermis, which is also sometimes called the subcutaneous layer, which lies right on top of the fascia that covers muscle throughout most of the body. It also can be known as the panniculus adiposus. Pan means throughout, panniculus, adipose, fat. Throughout the body there are fat pads, and in that area perhaps the proper name for the hypodermis area would be the panniculus adiposus. And altogether, the skin and its appendages, that is, the sweat glands and the hair follicles, are known as the integument. But again, you'll find that skin and integument are used sometimes interchangeably. Here, this overview, you can see the epidermis is very red, and then a layer of not so red underneath that. And the reddish area is the keratin in the stratum corneum, the dead cell. So this is pretty thick skin. And if I, let's say, increase the magnifications on this area, you can see the live cells are here. And then you'll have the layers of the keratinized, stratified keratinized epithelium. You'll have the basal layer, you'll have this spinosal layer where all the cells are producing keratin and making bags of keratin, and the organelles are being destroyed. And then, not very obvious here, but right in here, this is the stratum granulosum area, which would have basophilic granules, and then of course out here everything is fused together. But really, if you saw the details, these little spaces here are where the nuclei were in the cells, and this is just thousands and thousands of cells that are just bags of keratin. And this strange meandering structure you see here is actually the course of a sweat gland duct going through the stratum corneum. And down here you see this is the sweat gland duct itself in the dermis. And if we go down lower, particularly, well, let's say over here, there's a duct here, and then these are sweat glands in what we strictly call the hypodermis, where you still have the sweat gland ducts with stratified cuboidal epithelium, and then these are the cells of the sweat gland that produce the perspiration, the water and the chemicals. So again, you have two layers to the dermis. You have the more loose connective tissue up here in the papillary layer of the epidermis. As you move down, you'll see the collagen fibers get thicker, and this is the reticular layer. So from about here down to here is the reticular layer of the dermis. And then, of course, down here is the hypodermis, and we've got adipose tissue here. And I think I've annotated a terminal arteriole coming up here, feeding into capillaries. And remember that you will learn in the ear that there's an epithelium in the ear that has blood vessels in it, but other than that, throughout the body there are no blood vessels in epithelial tissue. So all of these living cells here get their nutrition from these capillaries in the papillary layer of the dermis. Now your job is to recognize some of the special cells other than the stratum basale cells and the stratum spinosum cells and the stratum granulosum and the stratum corneum. These cells that you see here that have light area around them in the stratum basale, those are melanocytes. They give off their pigment to these cells, but you don't recognize the pigment in the melanocytes that make the pigment and transfer it to the stratum spinosum cells. And then you have these weird looking cells with halos around them and a kind of a scrunched up nucleus, and those are Langerhans cells. Now these are antigen capturing and presenting cells that are mobile, and they move from the epidermis where they've captured an antigen and move down here into the dermis and get into a lymphatic, which is hard to recognize here in the dermis, but lymphatics are present, and they're vessels that carry lymph, and these Langerhans cells migrate to a lymph node where they present the antigen to either a T or a B lymphocyte. So I think that's pretty much the integument. Be sure to combine your learning in the lecture with the lab and with this specimen, and be able to revisit it in our quizzes.